Everybody hear me okay? Okay, acoustics are good in here? All right, good. So I want to thank everyone, first of all, for taking time out of, I know what everybody has busy days to come and start being part of this community conversation. You probably already started to be involved in many different ways. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be doing just an introduction to some evidence-based solutions and strategies to address homelessness, especially chronic homelessness. So let me tell you a little bit, first of all, about who I am and the company that's here today. We're Housing Tools, and we're a consulting firm. We're a very small consulting firm. We have 4 people in our office. We're not a big consulting firm. And what we do is affordable housing and community development consulting. And our specialty focus area is working with rural communities in Northern California. We all live, Cassie and I both live in a rural community, semi-rural community, and we do work across Northern California. And we really feel strongly and passionately about helping rural communities because we know rural communities are typically left behind when the state is considering funding and programs and resources. So we come from a background of working in affordable housing, homeless services. Both Cassie and I have worked directly as case managers with individuals and families who are homeless. Also public health and social services. So we've kind of got a pretty broad and holistic perspective on the issue of homelessness. And my name is Sherry Morgado. I'm the Community Development Manager, and Cassie is my colleague back here in the corner, Cassie Miracle. She's our project specialist. So why are we here today? We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Let me back up for just a second. So we were hired by Del Norte County with some technical assistance money that they received from the state through the No Place Like Home program that we're going to be talking about. And this technical assistance money is specifically to help local communities do the planning and investigation steps that they need to take to start to apply for some new state funding that's becoming available specifically to address homelessness with permanent supportive housing. So that's why we're here. So we're going to go over why we're here today, what we're going to be talking about in this session, and then we're going to go through a little introduction to the No Place Like Home funding program that the county is considering applying for. Then we're going to go through sort of some basic education and understanding about what affordable housing is, about permanent supportive housing, and a principle called Housing First, or a framework or an approach to deal with homelessness. We're going to go through some examples of some permanent supportive housing projects from some other communities so you can kind of see what one of these would look like and how they get funded. And then we're going to talk about what the next steps for the county are so that you know what's going to be happening, sort of what the timeline is, and additional ways that you can continue to be involved. Okay. So, why are we here? Well, certainly the issue of homelessness and how to solve it is a concern for everyone in the community. And this is true no matter where we go, from small rural areas to urban areas. Everyone's concerned about it. We may all have different perspectives on it in terms of what causes it and how to address it, but we're all concerned about it. And that's the important thing, is communities coming together and having these conversations. The other thing is that we now have enough research in place to know what works to solve homelessness. We really have evidence-based approaches. We understand the effective models that can be implemented because they've been done elsewhere and we know they can be replicated. And then we're here to share this information and describe the preliminary steps that the county is working on to bring these models into Del Norte County. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit first about understanding homelessness in Del Norte County in terms of what the scope of the issue is. So how that scope is typically determined is through a point-in-time count. And so what that is a count that is done on a single night, typically in late January, and it's an attempt to count everyone in the community who is homeless that could be sheltered in an emergency shelter situation, including like having motel vouchers, or completely unsheltered. And communities all across the nation do this count. So at the federal level, the Department of Housing and Urban Development asks communities to do this, and any community that's actually receiving money from HUD is required to do this. Some communities do it every 2 years, some do it every year. At a minimum, they have to do it every 2 years. And the idea is that HUD wants to have an idea of what homelessness in our country looks like, and that helps them then allocate resources and decide on which programs they're going to roll out and encourage communities to do to try to address homelessness. So there's a set of mandated questions that every community has to ask. There's sort of some data that HUD wants to know that has to be reported to them, but communities can also add their own questions to that set to learn more about homelessness in their region. So for the 2019 point in time count that was done here in Del Norte, that was done in late January. And recognize that a point in time count is a best effort. It's not perfect. There's really no way to say accurately that you've counted everyone because you're sending members of staff from nonprofits, from the county and community volunteers out to seek people, and you can't necessarily find everyone, and also completing the survey is voluntary, so if someone doesn't want to participate, they don't have to. But it typically provides a snapshot. So for 2019, there were 189 total people experiencing homelessness that were surveyed here. 97% of them indicated that they were sleeping in Crescent City, 2% in Klamath, and 1% in Smith River. 75% of those people that completed the survey, or 141 people, were sleeping completely unsheltered. So the vast majority. And then you can see the breakdown here of where people indicated they were sleeping. 63% outdoor encampment, 19% vehicle or boat, 14% on the street or sidewalk, and 4% in an abandoned building. A little more data in terms of snapshot. Some of the questions that are asked are about people's disabilities and barriers that they are struggling with. So 35% reported a mental health condition, 37% reported using drugs and or alcohol, 38% reported a chronic disability, 55% were determined to be chronically homeless, and basically the way that that is determined is that they're homeless a certain number of times over a 3-year period, or they have a consistent period of homelessness that exceeds 12 months or more. 75% again reported being unsheltered, and 54% were between the ages of 25 and 45. And with these numbers, people can report in more than one category. So in other words, somebody could have a co-occurring disability and a substance use disorder, a mental health condition and a substance use disorder, that type of thing. Okay, so given that snapshot of what homelessness looks like right now in Del Norte County, we're going to switch and talk a little bit about the No Place Like Home program, which we refer to as NPLH. So if you hear me use that acronym, I'll try not to use it, but that's what it means. So the No Place Like Home program funding was enacted by Governor Brown in 2016, and the purpose of this money is to basically dedicate up to $2 billion in bond proceeds to invest in permanent supportive housing for a target population that is to benefit from No Place Like Home. And I'll talk about what that target population is in just a minute. And how the bonds get repaid is there's a dedicated source of funding at the state called the Mental Health Services Act, and that's funded through tax on those that make $1 million or more. So it's sort of the millionaire's tax. And each county can apply for both some non-competitive No Place Like Home funds and competitive. There's 2 pots of money. And the idea behind that was when the legislature approved this, they wanted to make sure that every community, no matter how small, could receive at least a minimum allocation to try to address chronic homelessness. So Del Norte County is considered in the small county category, any county that has a population below 200,000. And those counties can receive 500,000. That's non-competitive. So what that basically means is if the county decides to pursue this funding, as long as they meet certain threshold requirements in their application, they're going to receive that non-competitive money. Now the county can also apply for competitive funds, and if they choose to do that, they would be competing against other counties of a similar size. Again, that small county category, population under 200,000. The maximum loan amount that a county can get for each housing project is $20 million. And that's a combination of both non-competitive and competitive money. And that limit is the same statewide. Doesn't matter what size of a county you are. Okay, so who are these funds designed to serve? So the funds have to be used to create permanent supportive housing units. We're going to talk about what that is. And they have to specifically be set aside for adults with a serious mental disorder and or seriously emotionally disturbed children and their families who are homeless, chronically homeless, or at risk of chronic homelessness. So these are really the individuals within the homeless population who are the most vulnerable and who typically are the most service intensive in terms of the community services that they're utilizing in terms of behavioral health services, medical services, emergency services, police response to situations, that type of thing. So counties are the eligible applicants in this program. They actually are the ones designated in the legislation to apply for the money. But counties are not expected to develop the housing or own the housing or operate the housing. In most situations, the expectation is that the county is going to partner with what's called a development sponsor, okay? And a development sponsor is basically just a nonprofit affordable housing organization that has experience doing this type of work, developing these types of housing projects, and actually owning and operating them. The other thing about this permanent, yes?
When we talk about homeless, are we talking about with and without children, or with or without children?
Either one. Yes, either one. The other thing about the permanent supportive housing is that it has to use what is called housing first principles. And we're going to go into that in a lot more detail pretty soon. But basically what Housing First is about is that it's a low barrier tenant selection process in terms of prioritizing those that are the most vulnerable, not requiring that they participate in services in order to access the housing, and really offering flexible, individualized support services. We're going to go into that in a lot more detail, but that's the general idea. The other thing in accepting this funding is that counties have to commit to providing mental health services to the tenants in No Place Like Home units, and they have to coordinate that with other community services. There's a list of sort of required services that have to be offered, and the county has to commit to doing that for 20 years. Okay. So we're gonna back up a little bit, and we're gonna talk about what affordable housing is in general, because these concepts sort of build upon each other. Okay, affordable housing, permanent supportive housing. So basically, affordable housing, what is it in a nutshell? So it's housing that has a dedicated source of funding, or multiple sources of funding typically, during its construction and operation to ensure that it's affordable to households who earn 80% or less of the area median income. So those individuals or households would be considered low income. Okay? And the rents are set so that households pay a maximum of 30% of their income toward rent. That's what's considered affordable. And why is it needed? Well, households who pay more than 30% of their income for housing are considered to be cost burdened or rent burdened, and they may have difficulty affording other necessities like food and clothing and transportation and medical care, and they can't participate really fully in their local economy because they don't have any other disposable income with which to do that. So it's really important that housing costs, especially for individuals in households who are low income or below that threshold, are kept at affordable levels. So the basic eligibility, typically, I'm simplifying this, is that households must meet the income limits for that particular development, and they have to prove that they have some type of income to pay the rent. And then oftentimes there's other services that are provided on site, like GED or computer classes, exercise classes, adult education, that type of thing. So talking a little bit more about affordability, one of the terms that you're going to hear used a lot is area median income, and that is used as the criteria for what people can afford, okay? So in the previous slide, I talked about 80% of area median income, households making that or below are considered low income. And The median income is the middle income for all households within a community. So if you took the lowest income in Del Norte and the absolute highest household income and you went right to the middle, that would be the median income, okay? So for 2018, the area median income for the county was $55,300. 80% of that, or $33,029, would be considered low income. So affordable housing is intended for households that are at or below this income level, just to give you an idea of who lives in and is eligible for affordable housing. And then if we go below that, 50% of area median income is considered very low income, 30% of area median income is considered extremely low income. The population that is going to be eligible for the No Place Like Home units are going to be those that are at that 30% or below, the extremely low income category. So let's just take a quick look at affordable rent compared to fair market rent in Del Norte County right now. So right now, for a 2-bedroom apartment, the fair market rent, which is basically what the market could reasonably expect to charge if there are enough units and there's a healthy vacancy rate and all other things being equal, is $945 a month. That would be fair market rent. But you can see that this is for normed for a 3-person household. When you go to the 60% area median income limit and then down to 50 and 30%, you can start to see the gap between what that household can afford when they pay no more than 30% of their income toward rent and what the fair market rent actually is. Okay, so that gives you a sense of why affordable housing is so important. Okay, a little bit more of a snapshot. There are 9,420 housing units in the county, and renters currently occupy nearly 40% of those units, or 3,716 units. There are 3,719 households, almost the same number of households as there are renter units, who make 80% of area median income or less. So those households are all at least low income. And there are 572 affordable apartments for rent in the county, with 204 of those that have rent based on income. In other words, they're income restricted. They have affordability restrictions on them because of the funding sources that they use. 368 that don't have rental assistance but are still considered to be affordable for low-income families. But then you see that there's obviously a gap, right? And some of that gap can be made up by providing Section 8 housing choice vouchers, but that can't fill in all of the gap in terms of what the need is. So in terms of cost burden renter households, right now in the county, 52% of renter households are paying more than 30% of household income to rent. Okay, so that sort of sets the stage for kind of affordable housing in general. And given what we were talking about with the No Place Like Home target population being at that 30% income level, you can see why housing can be such an issue for those individuals who have such limited economic resources. So now we're going to talk about permanent supportive housing, what it is exactly. So it combines affordable housing with services, just like it sounds. It's designed for people with serious mental illness or other disabilities who need support to live stably in their community. And without those supports and without that affordable housing, they really wouldn't be able to live stably. This is housing that doesn't have any time limit on how long someone can live in it. They have a regular lease, just like any other tenant. They have the same rights and responsibilities in terms of that rental unit. They have responsibilities that they have to maintain as a tenant, and they have rights as a tenant. They are provided services, typically on-site, but also linkage to services off-site, and that includes case management, often with a case manager from the County Behavioral Health Department or Social Services, or a combination, or nonprofit agencies sometimes provide those services, substance use services, mental health counseling, some life skills training, assistance in connecting with employment, that type of thing. And it's actually a proven solution for people who've experienced chronic homelessness, as well as people with other disabilities. It's definitely shown to be successful, cost-effective, and beneficial, and we're going to talk about that. So in terms of how it improves lives, it's been shown to decrease homelessness, have positive effects on those individuals' housing stability in terms of when they move from homelessness into being housed, how long they stay housed, their ability to obtain employment, their earnings, and their health outcomes. So for that individual that's the recipient of permanent supportive housing, those are some of the benefits for them. In terms of the public systems, it generates cost savings. It's been shown to decrease the use of emergency shelters, hospitals, emergency rooms, jails, and prisons, which are often many of the services that individuals in a chronic homelessness cycle end up using over and over and over again. And then how it benefits the greater community is that it's been shown to improve safety within neighborhoods and within the greater community. And that the other thing is it integrates residents back into their own community. So there's no longer that divide or separation. And that really benefits the whole community as well, when people can contribute and be part of their community. So a little bit more about what the studies show. So it's been shown to significantly decrease the proportion of time that people spend homeless, declines in the number of shelter days that they use, and reduced emergency shelter costs. In terms of their housing retention, and these are nationwide statistics that I've put in here, it shows that 73% to 93% of residents stay housed after 1 year in permanent supportive housing. So in other words, they're not falling out and going back into homelessness. 14 to 18% have exited to transitional or institutional setting because it was determined maybe that was a better residential setting for them. And 10 to 15% exit to permanent housing, more like regular affordable housing. So wanted to show you a little bit of data from some case studies. This is the state of Utah. So starting back just before 2005, Utah was really experiencing some problems with constant increases in the number of chronically homeless households and individuals. And they decided that they really needed to do something about it. And so the state of Utah decided to really devote some serious resources to addressing chronic homelessness through permanent supportive housing. So they were doing this in terms of, they actually established a governor's office on homelessness. They staffed it. They were providing money to local governments. And they were looking at creative solutions. Not just, they were building new units, but they were also looking at all the places where they had vacancies, like in high-rise apartment buildings in some of the cities, and they were renting those units for individuals and placing them there with case management wraparound services. It was really a significant push to get people housed. And what they saw, you can see over this is a decade, it's from 2005 to 2015, steady decreases in chronic homelessness. And so Utah has been held up as one of the models of how permanent supportive housing can work and its success. And so the thing about permanent supportive housing is that it's attempting to disrupt this cycle, which can be rather typical, of people moving between what I would call a sort of acute emergency services, jail, detox facilities, emergency residential treatment, the use of emergency rooms for basic medical care, psychiatric hospitalizations, and the use of emergency shelters. People can often just end up in this cycle, and it can be very difficult to get out of it, because without the provision of permanent supportive housing, there's just not enough stability for them to leave this cycle. So in California, what has been found in the places that permanent supportive housing has been implemented and studied over a period of time is that it has reduced visits to emergency rooms by 56%. And this is for individuals who were experiencing chronic homelessness, obviously. Reduced hospital admissions by 45%, and 93% of tenants with mental illness and substance use disorders participated in the support services that were offered to them through their permanent supportive housing, even though it was not required of them. And then this is a study from rural Maine where they tracked the costs again of sort of these acute emergency services over time. So the top bar is, in case you can't read it, it's mental health care, and then emergency shelter, emergency room, jail, and ambulance. So the blue shows how much money they were spending on average per person to provide those services, and then the orange is after they provided housing. So decreases in those costs that the public is bearing. There's sometimes costs that are a little nebulous or a little hidden. I mean, everybody knows they're there, but if they can be quantified, you can see that the costs are actually quite significant in terms of the millions of dollars that are being spent to try to address people's acute needs. So now we're going to talk about housing first, and we're going to tie this all together so you see how permanent supportive housing and housing first go together. So housing first is more of an approach or a framework to address homelessness, and it's centered on the belief that everyone can achieve stability and permanent supportive housing directly from homelessness. You don't need to transition along the way with various steps, that you can go from being homeless to being housed permanently, and that people can achieve success with that type of a model. It's based on the belief that stable housing is the foundation that people need to pursue other health and economic needs. So before they can attend to substance use issues, before they can look at getting a job, they need to be stably housed first. And then it also believes that client choice is very valuable in terms of them selecting their housing and deciding what supportive services they participate in, and that by them being able to exercise that choice rather than having those services required, that they are actually more likely to make those choices and then be successful in retaining their housing. Okay, so this sort of demonstrates this little chart here on the top. This is what we call typical housing readiness. So this is what we have been doing in this country and in this state for decades, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit about shelter pretty soon, because what I don't want people to do is take away from this the idea that emergency shelters are bad or that they're not needed. They are. It's just we need to change where the emphasis is. So, and this is what Housing First does. So the traditional model would be you go from being homeless into a shelter, and you stay in a shelter while you're getting some case management services, some medical treatment, behavioral health treatment, that type of thing. And once you're stabilized in that shelter setting, then we'll put you in some transitional housing. And transitional housing is that halfway point. You know, it's not permanent housing. You still have to comply with participation requirements, and if you don't, we could kick you out again. You don't have your own lease, that type of thing. But the idea was that people could get stabilized, and then they could start to work on getting a job, building up their income, and learning how to be a good tenant in a tenant-landlord relationship. But what was found through the evidence was, in this red, these fail points, is that this is where people were falling out, right? And then they were just circling back around again. With Housing First, the idea is that it's literally what it says. You just put people in permanent supportive housing to begin with. And in the permanent supportive housing, they're then offered those services like medical, behavioral, mental health services, income, that type of thing. And then they move on to life stability. It's not to say that no one ever falls out. Of course, this isn't perfect. People do still fall out. But the vast majority of individuals have been shown to then be able to achieve life stability and housing stability. So what it does is it takes the housing and the support services and it just rearranges where they are, sort of in that whole system of care that we've been providing. Okay. So what has been found through the research is that consumers in a Housing First model access housing faster, and they're more likely to remain stably housed. So they're not on the street anymore. A majority of clients are found to actually use the optional supportive services, and they're more likely to participate in job training, to attend school, to discontinue substance use, to have fewer instances of domestic violence, and spend fewer days hospitalized. So one study found an average cost savings on emergency services of $31,545 per person housed in the Housing First program over the course of 2 years. Many hospitals will tell you, and they do to some extent, each hospital is different, track data on what they would call frequent users, right? People who are coming into the emergency room on a really frequent basis for basic medical care, often with chronic health conditions that they're not seeing a primary care physician for, like out of control diabetes or asthma, and they end up in a crisis situation and end up in the emergency room, right? So their healthcare needs are not being met. They're not getting better, but at the same time, the healthcare system is spending a lot of money attempting to treat this condition. Another study showed that a Housing First program could cost up to $23,000 less per consumer per year than a shelter program. Because obviously there are costs to permanent supportive housing, there's no doubt about it, but we're spending money on these other these other services, and that money, the idea with Housing First is that money can be shifted to a more permanent solution. Okay, so that was a lot of information, so we're gonna break this down and review it. So going back to the No Place Like Home program, which is this new funding source from the state, it's gonna provide funding for the development of permanent supportive housing units in Del Norte County, if the county decides to apply for the money. And it has to use a Housing First approach. So what we just described is what that money is intended to do. Take homeless and chronically homeless individuals and families, put them into housing, offer wraparound services, but not require those services. Permanent supportive housing is a combination of both affordable housing and services for people who need those supports to live independently. Housing First is an approach, it's a framework for ending homelessness by putting housing at the front of interventions rather than at the end of interventions. And then permanent supportive housing and Housing First are complementary tools, okay? They go together. And they've been found to really be effective, as we saw in Utah, to end chronic homelessness and help people with disabilities live independently. One thing I want to add about Housing First is this has really been adopted nationwide and especially in California. So the state of California has made it really clear that any funding that they provide to localities for any type of housing, and especially new programs that are coming up, have to use the Housing First model. Okay, so this is going to be an expectation and a requirement.
When did that start?
It's already started, yeah.
It's a requirement.
Yeah. So all of the new funding that is coming out from the State Department of Housing and Community Development, you'll notice that literally in all of their notices, they say Housing First principles must be adhered to.
Does that apply to tribal, do you know?
That's a good question. I don't know if it would or not. We'll research that. Cassie's taking notes on things, and we're gonna research that and find out. Okay, so I wanted to provide you some examples of some permanent supportive housing developments that we're familiar with, to show you just kind of how this money could work and what could be built. So this is an example from where we live. We live in Butte County, and this is called Valley View Apartments. It's actually, and I'll describe it in just a minute. It's a small complex, and it's located right behind our year-round community emergency shelter that we have there that serves both individuals and families. And it was developed by Palm Communities, and it's owned and operated by Northern Valley Catholic Social Services. So, earlier when we were talking about No Place Like Home, I said the county is going to be, if they choose to apply for this money, would be partnering with a development sponsor, okay? Palm Communities, in this case, was the development sponsor, and Northern Valley Catholic Social Services is a nonprofit organization that does a lot of special needs housing, and they're very experienced at this, and so they're actually managing the project. So what this provides is 15 units. It's not really big. It has 14 one-bedroom units, and so those one-bedroom units have a legitimate bedroom. They have a living room, a kitchen, dining area, and a bathroom, okay? There's also a two-bedroom unit on site that has a full-time resident manager. And all of the residents who live there were formerly homeless individuals. They all have a serious mental illness, and they're referred to these housing units and then case managed by Butte County Behavioral Health. So although the No Place Like Home program wasn't in place yet when this was built, this is a very similar type of project using similar type of funds. And they do provide social services on site. There's a community room there with a small kitchen and a dining area and a small computer lab. So they do provide computer training, they do literacy, money management, they do some vocational training there in coordination with the homeless shelter, and continuing adult ed, that type of thing. So wanted to demonstrate how these types of projects get funded. And I know this is a lot of information. You don't have to worry about knowing all of the details. Kind of what the takeaway from this is that the No Place Like Home funding would be one component of funding for a project, potentially. It's not going to be enough to build, $500,000 isn't going to build you much. Let's be honest with you, especially not with construction costs being what they are. And with the way that affordable housing works and subsidies are built into the budget up at the very beginning because these need to stay affordable over the long term. But this will just give you an idea of the various layers. So this project was built in 2016 to give you an idea how old it is. So it's 3 years old. So they were able to access $1.5 million in Mental Health Services Act housing program money, and that came from the county as well. The city of Chico put in both some home and CDBG funding, and those are federal grants from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We are very lucky that we have a nonprofit housing trust in our community called the North Valley Housing Trust. They put in $300,000. And then the really substantial money came in from tax credit equity, which was $3.6 million. That comes from a program called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. And basically what that is it's the largest source actually of money for the development of affordable housing in the United States. And it actually leverages private investment. So this is investment from the private sector. Normally banks would be typical investors who have access to a lot of money, right? A lot of cash. And they're able to contribute that cash to provide equity to the project so it can be built. In exchange for that, they get credits on their income tax, a dollar for dollar credit on their income tax. That's how it works. It's actually a program that's administered at the federal level by the IRS. And then in California, there's a division of the state controller's office that oversees how those tax credits get allocated. Okay. So that project was $5.7 million, just so you can see how these things get funded. Closer to here, we do have an example from Humboldt County, Arcata Bay Crossing, which was developed by RCH, stands for Rural Communities Housing Development Corporation, and they do own and operate a few affordable housing projects here in Del Norte County. This is one of their region is the North Central Coast, and they did that also in partnership with Housing Humboldt. So this one is a little bit different. This one's 31 affordable housing units, and 15 of those are specifically set aside for individuals who are homeless with a mental illness. So again, very similar to what we're talking about with No Place Like Home. But then the other 16 units are for qualified low-income households. So this whole project is affordable, but only 15 of the units would be considered permanent supportive housing, okay? And the city of Arcata assisted Housing Humboldt with some loan funding for the purchase of the land. They also gave them some CDBG funds to assist with the offsite improvements so they could connect up to the infrastructure. And the development budget on that one was $5.8 million. So just a little bit more than that earlier project I showed you, but a bigger project. So they also had Mental Health Services Act funding, $1.3 million. Then you can see the city participated by providing some loans and grants. The developer actually contributed money, $75,000 out of their own fee, basically the fee that they would generally take to cover like their staff costs. They deferred that for a period of time and contributed that to the project. They got some solar tax credits, and then they had housing tax credits, the low income equity program of 3.4 million. So again, you can see multiple layers of funding is what it takes to make these work. So what about Del Norte County? How much money does it have right now? So right now, the county has available to it just a little over $418,000 in Mental Health Services Act Housing Program funds. So you saw that on the other two slides as well. This is the Mental Health Services Act is funded through that millionaire's tax that we talked about at the beginning. And what happened fairly early on in that program is some of that money was carved out specifically to do housing development. And some counties have used their money and some counties still have that money sitting there waiting for them. And Del Norte's one of those. The other funding source that is secured at this point would be $490,000 from Partnership Health. So Partnership Healthcare is the county's managed Medi-Cal provider, and they actually provide those services in a 14-county region in sort of north central California. And what they have decided to do, because again, they're the managed Medi-Cal provider, and so many of their consumers are individuals who would need housing like this, and those individuals who are in that cycle of sort of the acute services, they've decided that they want to invest in housing to improve people's lives, stabilize their lives, so that they're not such a heavy consumer of those healthcare services, and to get their healthcare needs taken care of, obviously. The other thing that we know is that the county is eligible for that $500,000 in No Place Like Home non-competitive funds, okay? So you can see how much money is, at this point, that we know would be available for a project. Now, what hasn't been determined, we'll talk about that, is the county for sure gonna go forward with this? If so, what type of a housing model would the county be looking at? And how big of a project? And all of that would determine what other funding is needed. Some other funding sources that the county could, in partnership with the development sponsor, go for could be the No Place Like Home competitive money. They could go for some tax credits. There's other programs like the Affordable Housing Program through the Federal Home Loan Bank, and there's a multitude of other state and federal programs. And especially now with the new governor that's in office, Governor Newsom, he's putting a tremendous emphasis on working with his legislature to get money allocated for affordable housing and homelessness. So there's just going to be more money coming down the line. That seems to be the reality of what's going to happen. So where do things stand right now? So the eventual housing project model and size has not yet been determined. That's a lot of the conversation that's happening right now. I know that Senator McGuire was in the county again last week and did a big town hall meeting to discuss this. I know he, at the state level, has been a big champion of the No Place Like Home program, as well as bringing in more funding for affordable housing in general. But these are the conversations that the county is having with the community right now. The development sponsor that the county might partner with has not yet been selected either. That process and that investigation will be starting in the next couple of months. But really, all of those decisions are going to be informed by some of the data and input from the homeless plan strategy process that the county's been going through. So the county has a draft homeless plan that's available right now for comment, right? It's up on the county's website?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, and then as we're engaging with the community and we're looking at some of the data, one of the things our firm will also be doing is a fiscal feasibility analysis of some various models and sites to see what might work. And then the county will be issuing some sort of a request for qualifications or a request for proposal from development sponsors to see who might be interested in working in Del Norte County. So those things are all underway, right? They're all underway, and they're gonna take a little bit of time. They're gonna take a few months at the very least. So the next steps, the county will have to submit some documents to the state to meet the state's threshold requirements. So those non-competitive funds that I mentioned, those do have to be accepted by the county by August the 15th of this year, and that's a requirement statewide. The reason why is that when the legislature approved the legislation, they wanted to make sure the funds were going to be getting out there and getting spent and actually seeing supportive housing built. So they did put some timelines in. So if a county doesn't want to accept its non-competitive funds, it doesn't have to. Basically, those funds are just going to go back into the pot statewide and they'd be available for other counties to compete for. Okay. So in order to secure or sort of accept that allocation, the county has to submit their plan to reduce homelessness, and they have some other just basic documentation that has to be submitted, a board resolution and some certifications. So what we're assisting the county with is doing some community education. Yes?
I'm hearing that the county's in the process of its application. Is that what I'm hearing? That they already turned their application in, or?
Tony, you want to elaborate
No,
on that?
we're going through a current process of developing and putting the final touches on our goals and strategies right now. That plan is out for public comment. We've been working with stakeholders, a group of stakeholders for the last 6 months to a year, I can't remember, to put together this plan. It's been released to the public to get to community input in order to finalize it. Once that plan is finalized, we'll go to the Board of Supervisors, and the city will go to the City Council, adopt that plan, and that will be our first step in accepting that non-competitive funding.
Okay.
So there hasn't been any applications at this point. We're doing our due diligence in order to establish whether or not that's the path we take.
Okay.
Right. For a lot of counties that haven't completely yet decided, like Del Norte, exactly what they're going to do, or even if they are going to ultimately apply for the funding, at the very least they want to secure that non-competitive allocation, because if you don't secure it, the state's going to give it to somebody else, right? So.
And this has to be done by August.
Right. That part has to be done by August. But what happens after that? There is a whole project application that has to be turned in for the actual housing project that the development sponsor wants to do in partnership with the county. And so there's multiple steps in this process. And the acceptance of the non-competitive allocation is just the very first step. It also doesn't commit the county to doing anything, right? So you can accept your non-competitive allocation and say, please hold on to that for us, state, don't give it to somebody else, while we're still figuring the rest of everything out on the other side. So what we're doing to assist the county is we're doing community education workshops like this one and helping to gather stakeholder input. We're conducting a site feasibility analysis, and we're going to be providing the county with a report on some recommended models, what we think might be feasible here, and helping them to identify other resources in terms of funding and potential development sponsors that could want to come into the county to do this work. So some of you noticed when you walked in, you picked up a paper copy of that survey. We are looking for some additional input to try to understand a little bit better how people feel about the current situation of homelessness in the county, what's being done, and things that you would like to see happen for the future. So you can take the survey directly online, and we would love it if you did that, because that is really nice for us, but you can also do a paper copy and give it to us before you leave. We're fine with that as well. If you know individuals that would like to participate, please take some, you can take some copies and then direct them to that link, if you can write that down. We should have put it on there, but we didn't. But we would really love to have people participating in the survey in the county as well.
That link will also be placed on the county website at dnco.org. And if you access our page at the top right-hand corner, there's a No Place Like Home webpage that'll take you to not only the survey link, but also a link so you can view the goals and strategies plan to provide your input directly online as well.
All of the information on your slides, is that available somewhere online? Because
Yeah, the
there's a lot of
county's
information.
we're actually gonna post this presentation online.
Okay.
Yeah, so at the same,
Same
that
site,
same
I-
webpage,
Okay.
yeah, go to the county's webpage, top right-hand corner?
Yes.
Okay.
Are you aware of Channel 4 on cable TV?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Channel 4 is put out from the IT guys that work in one of the school district buildings over there by the firehouse on Washington. And you can run a lot of things on Channel 4, and all you have to do is go in there and talk to them, and they have an actual, if one of these roll arounds, it gives you an ad and then it moves to another one. But you can advertise your meetings there. You can advertise things like this survey. And because there are a lot of people here in town that, number one, don't get the paper. Number two, they are afraid of taking a survey and don't have a computer. Some of them don't even know how to turn one on if they have it. And so I think it would help facilitate things if people would use that service more. I know that the radio club has started using it. Nobody even knew about it. And if you go into Spectrum, they'll tell you it doesn't exist.
So it's like the public access
Yes,
station?
it's a
Yeah,
public
I'll
access.
reach out and get that on there, as
Okay.
well as the possible recording if we can.
Okay,
I didn't
yeah,
even think of that.
yeah.
But it
Thank you.
also helps people come to meetings like this when they don't hear about it any other way.
Mhm.
So,
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so are there any questions that you have that I didn't address? Yeah.
Do we have enough case managers to handle our present situation with the homeless for these facilities right now?
I know we don't have anybody from behavioral health here right
No.
now.
And I think what Heather said was that they're already providing a lot of the services to the individuals, but it will be an added strain to the Health and Human Services office, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Will this funding allow more positions to be hired?
No, it only
So-
provides for the capital costs of the construction.
So that'll be up to the county's responsibility.
That is right, yep. Yeah.
on this count of the homeless that takes place usually at the end of January, are you aware of the fact that they're doing a census in 2020? And one of the questions that they're going to be asking people is whether or not they are a citizen. If someone is, let's say, not a citizen, but they have a work visa, are they going to be eligible to enter this program? If they meet all of the other requirements?
I don't know, how does that work with housing vouchers? Because I think it's going to be the same.
For our program, which is federally funded, as long as there's one member of the household that is in the United States legally, the entire household can be assisted. There's a prorated calculation so that the actual amount of dollars assisting that household are factored only to assist the one who is here legally, whether they're a citizen or not. As long as the U.S. government knows they're here, that's considered legally here. And they turn a blind eye to the remaining members.
And I believe it will be the same for any housing program that is funded without.
But it would be interesting if we could have that same count for things like this, counting, I mean, not the citizenship part necessarily, but the number of people that they're actually saying we have in the county, that maybe we could get more money.
Yeah, I don't know, and I'm not familiar, because the COs, here I go using jargon again, the continuum of care. So Del Norte County participates in a 7-county consortium called the Continuum of Care. And it's Shasta and Siskiyou and Del Norte and Lassen County, sort of remote rural Northern California counties. And that continuum of care oversees some of the federal money that comes down directly to serve those who are homeless. And it's the continuum of care that helps to oversee that point in time count. So I don't know if is that a question that's being mandated by the feds? Is it? Okay, I wasn't
I
sure.
believe so.
Okay,
And just to add a little
Okay.
bit more to what your question, I think the issue with the pit count is that you are having an area where the homeless come to you to report that they are homeless in a count where you're going out, like into Smith River, into places where people are living in congregated housing. You would have to have a mechanism to go to them to elicit that information. They're most likely not going to come out to you and say, yeah, especially not if they're not here legally, they're probably afraid to come and say, hey, I'm here, I would like to be counted. So there would have to be some brainstorming as to what would be a way to elicit that information in a way to make people still feel safe, that they're not going to be in trouble for reporting themselves.
yeah.
One of the things that I was at the meeting last week also. One of the things I was kind of disappointed in was the discussion about the youth and families. It seems that if we can get some of these homeless kids that are, say, graduating high school or finishing high school and get them into some transitional housing, that could break the cycle further along. And again, I don't see anything in your presentation where there'd be an emphasis on maybe helping out these families. It's more for the mentally, the people with mental issues and drug issues and things. Is there any programs or any help for them?
There is. This is just one of many funding sources, and so we're focusing on this one because this is the work we're helping with the county with right now. But there are specific funds that are targeted to what's called transition-aged youth who are homeless, so transition age between ages of 18 and 24 who are homeless. There is specific funding available that service providers can apply for to help house that population. And I don't know, I'll have to admit, I don't know if there are any service providers in Del Norte County that are currently applying for that funding. Perhaps not, but those resources are available, definitely. The question is, always is, do you have a service provider who has the capacity to do that service?
I don't know, do we have a service provider up here that could handle this project?
Right now, there's not a development sponsor that's been sort of selected yet or even really spoken with. So that's going to be part of this next few months in terms of determining if that is possible.
I think it'd be
Yeah.
easier to find a developer because of the tax breaks than it would be a service provider or an overseer, basically. So,
How would this program be, because I noticed in Del Norte County, we have a lot that are registered homosexual. Basically, they're being monitored by the police and stuff, and they have to report every month. How are these people gonna fit into like a housing program?
That's a good question. They could be part of the No Place Like Home tenant population. It's entirely possible. They would certainly, depending upon where housing is sited, they would have to still comply with any limitations in terms of how close they are to a school or a preschool or a daycare center or that type of thing. But they could be one of the tenants. They would not be precluded from being a tenant because of their status.
now, one of your examples, you had a 15 unit, 16 unit with a manager on site. Now, is that manager a healthcare professional or is he just like an apartment complex manager? Is he going to have, required to have specific skills to monitor?
Typically, they do have, they are trained and they do have some set of skills. It depends upon the owner-operator and who they hire as their management company. But in permanent supportive housing, that is the expectation. And actually, one of the requirements with the No Place Like Home program is that the development sponsor, the management company, and the on-site manager all have to have experience serving this population, and that experience has to be demonstrated ahead of time before the state will allocate the money. So.
I read on, or I saw on TV this morning, there's a program in Eureka called New Directions. And their kind of motto is, we change the attitudes that change the behaviors in our communities. And they gave a telephone number, but this gentleman showed how they have taken people in the community who are either volunteers or maybe they're paid a small amount of money, but they go out and clean up areas, and I realize that we're doing some of that sometimes here in Delaware County. But then these same people go into the homes that were devastated by whoever was living in there, and they refurbish them, and they are actively involved in making things better for the homeless in Eureka, in Humboldt County. And they showed some of the people who were working on the homes were some of the people who had been picking up the trash out there, who were homeless. And so it was an interesting story. And the gentleman who started that program down there has now been declared a hero by the American Red Cross, and he's involved with them also. So just another
A
avenue.
community member stepping up, right? And doing something, yeah, for sure.
You worked on some of these projects in rural areas like here. A number of years ago, there was a project to put some low-income housing a couple miles south of here. Problem is, there's no services out here for those folks. There was a partially functioning grocery store, which is gone now completely. There's a inadequate bus service that comes through. That could be more adequate, it's fine, but to isolate a group of people, 15 or 20 people out here without transportation needs to be looked at also.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the requirements, especially if the project is going for tax credits, is it has to be close to services. It has to be close to amenities. For that very reason, right? You can't isolate people and then expect them to be successful when they can't get to services.
Okay, and can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Have you guys rolled this out in any other communities, specifically for No Place Like Home?
No,
No.
not
Okay.
yet. Most small counties, so the state has done one competitive application round. And those contracts, they're gonna be awarding that money in June, and they're gonna be doing their second round in September. So counties are just getting started on this. And small counties in particular are pretty much in the same place Del Norte is. Everybody's really in the process of working on their homeless strategy and their homeless plan, and meeting those threshold requirements, and then continuing to do the investigation part to see if this is gonna work in their community, and if they can find a development sponsor, and if so, what kind of model would they like to pursue. So, yeah, not quite there yet.
The one in Butte County, the Valley View,
Mhm.
what was the community response to that?
It was actually very well accepted, I think because of where it's located, because it's behind the existing year-round shelter that we have. So it wasn't adding any impacts. That area is actually quite commercial. The Costco is right across the street from it. And then the state fairgrounds is right behind it. So it wasn't in the middle of a residential neighborhood. And knowing that there was going to be on-site, management and significant case management, really wasn't any concern about it at all. So.
So then it's up to the Board of Supervisors to approve all of this by August.
Not all of it.
Not all of it.
Not all of
They
it.
have to put in an application.
Right. The only thing they have to do by August the 15th is
To buy into
submit the documents to basically accept that non-competitive allocation.
I was pretty optimistic with our board.
So.
Well, citizens got to get down there and harass them.
Well, yeah, is there a task force or anything?
So, Tom, this gentleman asked if there's like a homeless task force or anything.
There's nothing that's been set up by the county itself. The county has a stakeholders group that's made up of our local continuum of care, our local mental health board, county health and human services, behavioral health, all of the ones that make up health and human services, and city housing authority, as well as Sutter. We've been developing these goals and strategies. Now we're looking for the community's input to improve upon those goals and strategies. So there hasn't been a community task force per se. There was a group that I believe True North put together, a collaborative group, but I don't know the status of that.
See, like one of the difficulties I see is the hiring more case managers.
Yeah.
You know,
And the ability to be able to help these people and be able to have, or be required to do that for 20 years.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because we just don't
It's-
want to throw them into this and then you're on your own like everything
Well,
else.
and no, we're tied to this for 20 years. There's no letting them on their own. This is set up to where we bring on a development sponsor. These are not grants, these are loans. That's another thing. These loans will be taken on by the development sponsor as a post-construction loan. So they'll get their construction loans, and then how this works, it's confusing, and I don't want to get into it and confuse everybody, but those loans are 55 years for the development sponsor in order to be able to build the No Place Like Home permanent supportive housing. Our requirement would be on the services side, and that's tied for 20 years. So it's essentially half the life of the 55-year loans. So yeah, you're right, it's concerning.
Yeah,
Could you tell me how many other low-income housing tax credit programs the county has?
I'm not 100% sure. I know that there were some tax credits given to the apartment complexes behind Walmart, Hidden Creek and Summer Park, I believe.
So there was a development sponsor?
Yes, yes. Yeah, actually the same development sponsor, both of those projects.
And the serve. in
Yeah, oh, I didn't
downtown.
forget about services.
Yeah.
So I think definitely connect with the county on the No Place Like Home webpage, and that's where updates and everything are going to continue to be
Yes.
posted. And the comments and the input on the homeless plan, you're looking for those by the end of May?
I was hoping to get
Is
everything
that-
tidied up by the end of May. That
Okay.
way the city and the county can take it to their respective boards
Okay.
to gain their approval in case there was any issue, or they wanted to add some goals and strategies, or change the timelines if they wanted to push this, more towards the 15-year or 10-year or 5-year, depends. I've got the goals set up based on discussions with the stakeholders, but, yes, our goal is ultimately the end of May.
Okay. So people know what, yeah. And then we'll post the survey, the link for the survey will be there, and this PowerPoint presentation will be there as well.
And that's the same website where the plan will actually be.
Yes,
Yes,
yes, all in the same
That
location.
Mr. Hemmingson showed us
yes.
at a distance the other day.
Yeah, it was, that actual goals and strategy was released to the public the 12th of April. So yes, it's been there. Your input's important.
Yeah, definitely.
well, there's Board of Supervisors meeting twice a month,
Yes.
Yep.
so we should put the pressure on them to get a commit from each board member where they're at, and then work on the individuals that need to be convinced.
Well, and Supervisor Cowan as well as Supervisor Henningsen have been on the Senator McGuire's 2x2
Yeah.
that was set up a year and a half ago. So they've been driving this pretty hard as well.
So, but they have publicly committed that they're in favor of it.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Oh,
so we
yeah,
have
oh, yeah.
three, so we have three to put the pressure on to get at least a public commit from them. And that's the only way you're gonna get it done, is if you put the pressure on them to commit in open meeting in public.
You were asking about a task force. I think we found our task force.
I'm crazy, but I'm not stupid.
It's all a matter of perspective.
I got one of those little apartments for me. Because that's what I'll need if I get involved in that.
Okay, well, thank you all again for coming. Oh, yes, a question? Yeah.
When my pastor
This is
churches,
mainly for
don't you?
help ease the problem in the county. Is there going to be any restrictions on how long you lived here? Like say somebody could just move into a homeless camp from outside the area?
They have to meet the or the definition of chronic homeless in order to be considered for the program and referred by our public health department.
But it doesn't have to.
I don't think we can restrict it for long-term rather than somebody who just came in.
No, you actually, you can't do that.
Allows to pick and choose who
Yeah.
it's chronic.
There
Yeah.
won't be much incentive to do that either, though, because there's a lot of communities that are gonna be doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely.
It's a good question.
And what's the population count have to be below?
To be considered a small county, below 200,000.
And this is the first time, I think, ever where we're actually going to benefit from that because normally we compete with large communities like LA.
Yeah,
And you know how LA is with their homeless communities, we looked over quickly. So this is a benefit for our first time.
yeah, it really is. And there, and the other thing that's happening is with some small counties that are smaller than Del Norte, I mean, it's really going to be a struggle for them they just have even less services and less infrastructure. So they're probably going to leave their money on the table, which, yeah. But for you, it improves.
Competitively, that would be great for
Yeah,
us.
yeah.
Well, unless it involves bringing more people in, if they believe their services here, so. But that's always been an issue here. They've imported people here, or exported from Humboldt into this county in the past.
Like
Give people bus trips.
and-
Give
Oh,
people
no,
bus
they
trips.
gave a bus passes.
Bus
Put them
passes.
on our bus service and ship them up here, they're homeless.
and stuff.
In this community here, there's a lot of substandard housing that people are living in. So that's an issue too.
Right, yeah. I mean, this is, honestly and truthfully, this is designed to address like
That's real specific group.
a real specific group, and that we know that every community has got bigger affordable housing issues than, I mean, this is just a
So
piece
this
of
is a
it.
start.
It's a start. I mean, and I guess what I would say is that things look hopeful. I mean, I can't say it's guaranteed, but things look hopeful with the state legislature and the governor that they are really interested in giving communities some resources to deal with those issues. Because you're right, substandard housing is a tremendous issue. I mean, you have people who are really living in de facto conditions where if they weren't living in that substandard housing, they'd be homeless, but it's their last choice.
Yeah, but they're virtually homeless.
But they're virtually, right.
They have no electricity, they have
Right.
no roof, they have no electricity or
Right,
running water.
right, exactly.
And that's in downtown Smith River.
That's a whole nother problem that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, there's a spectrum of solutions that are really needed for our communities. It's not just openness, it's the shelters, it's, yeah, figuring out what we can do for people that are precariously housed, just hanging on to their house.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Again, please, if you have access to your computer, please go to the county website and take a look at our goals and strategies. And if you have some ideas, whether it be short-term goals or long-term goals, please provide the input because it's important. It's a community issue that we need to address. So.
But we can go onto that same website that
Yes.
you got.